Good morning if you're in the States. Good afternoon, good evening for the rest of you all over the globe. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Reuters, Insurance Nexus. The topic being auto insurers, OEMs and supply chains and collaborating for the new customer. I'd like to welcome, first of all, our moderator for the session, Stephen Applebaum, Managing Partner of Insurance Solutions, and our esteemed speakers. We have Sanjeev Mirle, Managing Director of Automotive and Mobility from Liberty Mutual, Pete Frey, Commercial Telematics and Connected Business Director nationwide, and also Clint Marlow, a Director at Allstate, for their opinions on the subject matter today. And really what we're trying to get to the bottom of essentially is the impact of the connected car on insurance, how that's changing ecosystems, what role will insurers have as the two major industries jostle for position and find collaboration to work with a shared customer. So I'll pass over to our moderator for the session, Stephen, and to introduce the topic further. Stephen.
Thank you, Graham, very much. And again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to our over 1,000 attendees. We've obviously offered a topic of great interest, and I'm not surprised because it's such a broad topic across a large ecosystem. But we're thrilled to have you on board. For those of you who have followed Insurance Nexus and our conferences and webinars for some time, you heard Graham mention that Insurance Nexus has been renamed as Reuters Events. The business was acquired in October of this year by Reuters, and we're proud to be called Reuters Events. Today's webinar, Auto Insurers, OEMs, and Supply Chain Collaborating for the New Consumer, crosses all those topics and more. And we have a very strong panel of subject matter experts, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy. The format for today is to have each of our three panelists make a few comments off the top to set the stage and let us know exactly their perspective and where they're coming from on this subject. You'll notice that they're all from insurance industries, but come at this from slightly different perspectives. Following those opening comments, we'll be collecting questions from the audience on the chat panels that you can all access, and we'll be directing those questions. I will be moderating and directing those questions back to the panelists. So we're going to have a lot of time for Q&A. That seems to be the most popular part of our webinars. I am the moderator for today's webinar. I am also the chairman of the Auto Insurance USA Conference, to be held next April 16th and 17th of 2020 here in Chicago at the Radisson Blu Hotel. And with that, and without further delay, I would like to introduce you all to Pete Frye, who is the Commercial Telematics and Connected Business Director at Nationwide, who will kick things off with his comments to open it up. Pete, thank you. Good morning, and please proceed.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Stephen. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to give some thoughts and opinions and to listen to my colleagues. I think this is an incredibly interesting and timely topic. So I'll start by saying I think there's, when you talk about, the new customer and the collaboration and how it affects each of the organizations in the ecosystem, there's probably four main things that, at least I know, as an insurance carrier, we're having to pay much more attention to. The first thing I would say is that as we look at collaborating, the partners that we're starting to collaborate with and conversations that we're starting to have, or if you would have asked me 3 years, 5 years ago, if these types of conversations would be happening, I would have said, yeah, probably not. That's a long shot. And here we are today having these kinds of conversations. And I'll start with when you talk about OEMs, it's a big one. We've always talked about, how do the OEMs and insurance carriers build partnerships, and it was definitely a struggle at first because we're talking about two totally different worlds, and the value propositions that come from those products are totally different. Well, now that's changing, and these conversations are happening, and I think they're happening out of necessity in many aspects, and so the organizations are having to learn a ton about each other. We need to, from an insurance carrier standpoint, we need to understand how the OEMs work and what drives them, and OEMs need to understand the insurance space a little bit and what drives them. But at the end of the day, we're each specialists in our own fields, and the challenge is how do you bring that together? And the reason we're having to bring that together is the second point, is that customer expectations are changing. They've changed drastically over the last few years, and with the advent of technology and how everything's evolving, those expectations are changing how we need to perceive those customers. Things like Amazon, things like Uber, things like Netflix even. These companies have changed the way that the expectations are for a customer, where real-time expectations, on-time, real-time, you name it. And so insurance carriers, OEMs alike, and anybody else in the value chain or in the supply chain is having to react to that. So I think that's huge. And as these partnerships evolve, the business models are changing. And what I mean by that is automakers, for instance, as many of you well know, are having to react to the world of mobility nowadays, the ride sharing, car sharing, subscription services. Selling a car is not the same anymore, and a customer's expectations around owning a car is not the same. So that changes, has to change the mindset of an OEM. And as an insurance carrier, we have to react to that, and we have to pay attention to the own mindset that our customers are evolving into as well. So the business model has to adapt and change, and sometimes those partnerships are the only way that those business models can succeed. And my last point I think that I'll make is obviously in the tech world, it's moving at a pace that I've never seen before, where it seems like every week there's a press release or an announcement of a new and exciting technology that has a chance to really change how things are done. And so you wrap all that up, and I think a conversation like this one, where we're talking about the new customer, where we're talking about a new way of collaborating and a new way of adapting, is incredibly important to our companies and organizations. So I'll leave it at that, but those are my initial thoughts. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Pete, very much. You've said enough in just those few minutes to generate literally hundreds of questions that'll, I'm sure, surface during Q&A, and I'm sure your colleagues here on the panel will touch upon similar and different topics as well. So thank you again. Now I'm going to turn to invite Clint Marlow, Director at Allstate, to share his comments on any of these topics. Clint? Don't forget to release your mute button, everybody.
Sorry about that, Steve. Thanks for allowing me to participate in the call this morning with you guys. Carrying obviously off our connected cars theme and really looking at things kind of early on from a customer perspective. And traditionally, in the event that an insurance customer had a loss, they would contact their insurer or agent and report the notice of the accident. We call it first notice of loss, and that claim handling process would begin. Realistically, in years past, unless the OEM had a dealership in the local market with a collision repair facility, that customer contact with the vehicle manufacturer during the claim process was pretty low. Now fast forward and move into a connected car world, and you start to think about what telematics and crash detection bring to the table. The great news is that people can verify the health of the driver and the passenger in almost real time and get them emergency services if required, right? So typically what would happen is that vehicle manufacturer would leverage the connected car. They would either stand up a call center or contract with a call center, use crash detection algorithms. You know how it goes. So they would reach out to the customer to ensure their health and begin to start to make sure that the customer had the services that they need. That changes things quite a bit. It is no longer just the insurer and the agent helping the customer get back on their feet and their vehicle repaired. That OEM is going to have a lot more influence and influence early on. Thinking again from a customer's perspective, if we collaborate and if we partner, we could create a delightful experience for the customer. So no matter if they talk to the insurer first or the OE first or their repairer first, everyone is kind of telling them the same thing in regard to simple things like how should the vehicle get to the repair facility, what kind of parts would be used, how long is it going to take to repair the car. All of those things, everyone would, in that whole ecosystem, would be on the same page. That's if we're thoughtful and we partner and we respect each other. If we don't do it right, you can imagine from a customer's perspective, if the messaging from the OEM is different than the messaging from the insurer, and then you throw a collision repair facility in that might have their own messaging, I think we would all agree that the opportunity for that customer to be very confused is pretty great. They probably don't know who to trust at that point. And I don't think, a whole lot of good can come from that. So I just want us to kind of think about what a great, delightful experience might look like in a connected car world from a claim perspective, and the reverse of that if we don't do it right as an industry. I'd also just like to take a few minutes and talk about, I think everyone on the phone probably realizes that it's going to take some time for connectivity and telematics to make it into the majority of the car park. That's going to evolve over time. And just some of the challenges associated with many industries that are going to, be charged with operationalizing the use of the telematics data. So if you just jump to end game, whether it be 15 years from now, 20 years from now, when all our cars are connected, there's this messy middle, right? Where some cars have connectivity, some cars don't. You got a lot of data privacy laws that we all are going to respect the customer's rights around their data. Most of us believe that the telematics data is owned by the vehicle owner, and they have choices. They're going to have a choice whether to share that data or not, and some will and some won't. And what that messy middle kind of creates for a lot of us, and this goes, beyond just insurers, most players in the ecosystem, is they're going to have to figure out how to live in two worlds and how to have, kind of legacy processes of what they do today for their customer. And then they're going to have another process and other systems that will be able to consume telematics data. It's going to be a much better experience. If the data is shared, it's really going to reduce first notice of lost time, and it'll be really focusing on the customer and their health and getting them back to normal with things that they really need, rather than asking them speed of the vehicle and where it was, etc. But I want everyone to also kind of keep in mind that there is going to be years of this messy middle where all of us are going to be forced to figure out how do we live in two worlds and make it efficient. That makes sense, Stephen? I appreciate the time to kind of talk about those two subjects.
Thanks so much, Clint. It makes a ton of sense, and I think you've probably now coined a phrase we're going to hear repeatedly for the next decade or so. That is the messy middle. And, all joking aside, it's an interesting phrase, but more importantly, it has an important meaning, and I'm sure we're going to be exploring that today and going forward. So thank you so much for your comments here today. And then finally, to round things out, and before we kick off our Q&A, I'd like to ask Sanjeev Mirle, the Managing Director of Automotive and Mobility Strategic Partnerships at Liberty Mutual, to add his perspective and thoughts to the discussion.
Thanks, Stephen. Again, great to be here, and echo everything that Pete and Clint said before me. Specifically, and again, looking at the title of this specific webinar and focusing on the customer, and Pete, you said correctly, the expectations of customers are changing, and you spoke a little bit about companies like Amazon and Netflix and so forth. It's interesting that customers' expectations, typically we don't think of them as being defined by either the automotive or the insurance industries, right? And so they are changing, and they're being defined by other industries, which we are very mindful of. There is, though, between the traditional auto and insurance industries, a lot that we have in common in terms of the brand promise that I think we're making. And so to me, what's interesting is if you look at the connected car evolution over the past few decades, honestly, the primary motivator has been safety and security. So whether that's Volvo OnCall or Mercedes Me or certainly OnStar, and I wouldn't leave any OEM out, there's various flavors of these services. The primary proposition here is peace of mind, safety, and security, and that's what insurance companies do as well, right? And so there is a natural interest, I think, especially with the emergence of new technology, for OEMs to want to extend that brand promise to new areas, and insurance is a natural one, I think. So for most customers, thinking again about the customer experience, the best insurance customer experience is none at all. We need to be there when we're needed, and Clint, you spoke correctly about, and I'd agree with you around the claims experience, because that's where it really matters, right? So when I think about the topic here for today and collaborating across our two industries, I really think that there's certainly a business value component to this, but what's really driving it from the perspective of both the carriers as well as the OEMs is improving the customer experience on the shopping and onboarding side, as well as on the claims side. And there's many ways that the industry is piloting and exploring that integration. And finally, I'll just call out, I think that there's a part A and a part B to this overall dialogue. And the first one is around the core business and the core customer. So we have auto insurance as we know it today in personal auto. Primarily, it operates a certain way, and there's collaboration that we can foresee that would improve the results for the customer and the OEMs as well as carriers in that world. And there's lots of change driving that core insurance experience or familiar insurance experience. But then there's also these emerging or new business models that we should probably spend some time talking about, right? And there's collaboration happening there as well. And that's areas like vehicle subscription and car sharing and ride hail. And OEMs are sitting on the sidelines here either. There's electric vehicles that are increasingly, there's an insurance component to how we think about that, right? And autonomous isn't far away either. So I think so. If you think about the core commonly understood insurance products that we have today, that's one area of collaboration. And certainly we can talk about the new mobility business models, which is very, very much, I think, on people's minds as well.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Wonderful. We've really rounded things out, and we're looking forward to the discussions. So while we're collecting questions from our audience, from our attendees, I'd like to start off, if I may, with one of my own questions, and that is, each of you have made reference to new technologies that are being deployed in the newer automobiles, and you listed what they are. And what I'm wondering is your view of the implications of those new technologies on the claims process and the claims experience, claims cost, and everything that to do with an auto insurer's management of claims. I'd like to ask each of you to comment on those implications, if you would, if you have something to offer, and I'll start with Clint.
Yeah, sure, Stephen. I'm gonna, no sense recreating the wheel on some of this stuff. So some of it I'm just gonna kind of agree with industry experts on. So I'm going to agree that the industry is going to see a reduction in frequency. It has to. I'm blessed with an opportunity to have a couple new vehicles in the family with ADAS systems. And, your typical, I backed into something or bumped this in the parking lot. You'd have to work pretty hard at making that happen now that the vehicle can stop itself. So this reduction in frequency is going to occur. You're going to see claims costs go up. Again, it's just logical that you're going to see there's more sensors and cameras and the need to scan in front and back of the repairs and calibrate those repairs. Those two things I simply just have to agree that the industry is going to experience as a whole. I think from kind of, I guess, what will be interesting from a technology perspective, and how do these things impact the claim process? I got to go back to my go-to with just the advantages to the customer that sharing the telematics data, with crash detection is going to make. I don't know who on this call has had to report a loss, and whether that's online or whether that's with voice. But it's a fairly lengthy, laborious process. And after a customer's had something traumatic happen to them, they kind of probably feel the first thing they've got to do is go through this, this effort. We put them to work, right? And we ask 100 questions when we could really answer the majority of them. You think about telematics data from the car, and it can tell me seat position. It can tell me whether the seat belts were used. It can tell me, obviously, where the car was with geolocations. And you start thinking about, then what do I really need to do? I verify coverage, and I verify that they want to start the claim process. And it really does revolutionize first notice of loss. That would be my thoughts, Steve. We could talk about any of these subjects for a lengthy amount of time.
Thanks, Clint. I appreciate that. By the way, our industry colleague and friend Jimmy Spears has coined the phrase "the battle for first notice of loss," referencing insurers and OEMs. And I think we'll hear more about that going forward as well. Pete, your focus is commercial, and I suspect you'll have some different kinds of comments about the implications of new technologies on the commercial side. Can you share?
Sure, absolutely. And honestly, though, a lot of what Clint mentioned is spot on. I mean, as far as what I've seen, read, and experienced. I mean, you take the claims experience is the claims experience, and the technology that's being put in these vehicles is going to be able to do exactly what Clint's talking about, and in terms of changing the way that process can happen. I mean, the impact to first notice of loss. And getting that expedited, and the data that comes from it, I mean, is going to be able to change it drastically, whether it's personal lines or commercial lines. I think the one subtle difference in commercial that we're starting to see is a huge trend in dash cam technology and any type of camera technology, whether it's passenger vehicles or whether it's trucking. The impact on liability is huge now, and that's where you're seeing to the tune of even millions of dollars that either are saved or used, based on what a dash cam can capture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would add that to what Clint said is one thing on the commercial side that is making a huge impact in that space. The other thing too, and this will go out probably a little further out, when you start talking about the claims experience. I mean, I think we can all agree that, with the technology that's in vehicles and in trucks, frequency is lower in claims, the cost is definitely going higher. But on that experience side, I think what I'm starting to see is how even other technology outside of connected vehicle technology could impact that experience. And the example I'll use is I was just reading an article, and folks on the call might know this probably better than I would, but organization that's looking at a blockchain network. So how do you use blockchain technology on top of connected vehicle technology or as a complement to connected vehicle technology to create this network of insurance carriers where at the time of an accident, you wouldn't have to ask anybody for proof of insurance or anything. Somehow within the blockchain, the network will be able to know and understand, so that not only is one carrier understanding that their insured was involved in an accident, but so is the other right at the same time. Again, I think I don't remember all the details, but in reading it, I thought, well, that's it's fascinating. We focus so much on connected vehicle technology that we're probably just scratching the surface. Once we start talking about some of these other technologies like blockchain or AI and what that can do in combination with connected vehicle technology, could totally change the experience of a claim for carriers, for OEMs, for consumers. So that's one thing I would add as well. When we talk about claims, I think the opportunities are just amazing.
Thanks, Pete. If I may, I'd like to add a follow-on question, a related follow-on question before I turn to Sanjeev comments. And that is, as between fleet or commercial insurance and fleets versus personal lines, pardon me, which of the segments do you think are adopting vehicle technologies at a different or faster rate? And
Sure.
how would I distinguish between the two? What marks the difference?
Well, I'll start by saying in the commercial space, commercial telematics specifically has been around for a long time. You take companies like a Geotab or Verizon. These are companies that have been dealing with commercial telematics and connected vehicles for a while, and especially in larger fleets, they've adopted this technology. There just hasn't been a connection to insurance. And so it's been mostly focused on fleet management and fleet safety, fleet efficiency, and then with the introduction of electronic logging requirements for trucking, that's kind of even emphasized it even more. So I think the technology's been adopted a lot quicker on the commercial side. But like I said, it hasn't been tied to insurance. So that's where our challenge lies. Is okay, how do you make this then a significant value proposition as an insurance carrier? I think in the past, if you take a look at insurance and telematics and the history there, I mean, obviously it started with personal lines, with UBI programs or pay by use type programs, and so and most of that was focused on discounts and still is, and there's some aspects of safety that are thrown in. And I think sometimes insurance carriers make a mistake of thinking that can translate easily into the commercial line space, and my argument is that it doesn't quite translate as easily because it's a totally different value proposition from a personal lines customer to a commercial lines customer. On the commercial lines side, discounts might be important to smaller fleets and smaller business owners, but as you go up fleet to larger businesses, larger fleets, value propositions, the priorities change a little bit. then you start seeing the need for, hey, I want fleet management. I need a way to manage my vehicles. I need a way to manage my drivers. I need a way to optimize the use of my fleet. And so the discount doesn't become quite as important. So on the commercial side, I think we have to recognize that the customer segments are different even within the walls of commercial lines, and I think the propositions are different. And so again, when you talk about adapting the technology, I think they adapt to the technology a little quicker and a little differently on the commercial side. And it causes an insurance carrier to really have to have a different lens on it that way, because we have to recognize and respect those differences.
Thanks. That's very informative, Pete. We appreciate the distinctions there. Sanjeev, back to the original question, which was the implications from your point of view and your company's point of view on the adoption of new technologies in automobiles.
Yeah. So again, I agree with Clint and Pete on their comments. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit more about if you think about the commercial and the personal lines implications, the lines are also blurring in some ways, right? And so if 1 in 5 new vehicles still today in the US are sold to fleets, and a majority of those are to small fleets. And so there really is an opportunity to build on the work over the past several years that's been done in fleet telematics that's been focused where the customer is really the fleet manager. And to think about how we can also bring in the opportunity to coach or to provide value to the driver or incentives to the operator. So I think that is an interesting area and I agree with Pete, there's a lot more runway there for us to explore. But one thing that hasn't been talked about yet, I think in terms of the implications of technology from a claims perspective, is the idea that we can provide customers a level of transparency and confidence in the process that has never been available to them before. And so from the point of that first notice of claim, and particularly in a way that is integrated with our OEM partners on connected vehicles, especially, what are the opportunities for OEMs and carriers to collaborate where we can provide an additional level of confidence and clarity, transparency, whether it's through an app or some other means on every step of that claims journey, and in so doing, create an avenue to get through that process with speed and at a lower cost, right? So happy to talk more about that as well.
Thanks, Sanjeev. One of the aspects of something you just mentioned that fascinates me, and I'm sure many others on this call, is the inevitable competition between insurers and OEMs for what is typically called in business ownership of the customer. And what I wonder, and I'll be glad if any of you would like to offer any comments, is it possible moving forward at some point down the line that insurers and OEMs will collaborate and partner in a way that allows for an effective mutual ownership of the customer? Or is that competing tension, do you think, always going to be there? Does anybody wish to comment on that before we move to the Q&A from the audience?
I mean, I'll jump in. Stephen, this is Clint. I believe that will happen. We're having more and more of those type of conversations around what would collaboration look like, what would, a relationship that is mutually, beneficial and equitable look like. And I think really the key driver is we're all after, kind of creating that delightful customer experience. And if we're both going to be involved, it's inevitable, it's not going away. The insurer is going to be involved, and for a variety of reasons, the OE is going to stay in the picture and be involved and be important to the customer. And if we don't partner, I would say that there's probably little chance that we're going to provide that delightful customer experience. We have to figure out how to do it. I believe we will.
Yep, I agree. I agree completely with Clint. I think if we were to compete for that customer, it's going to come at the expense of that customer, and I think that's a huge mistake. So I think Clint's absolutely right. I think we're having to figure out ways that this is going to work. Together, because I mean, I think earlier discussions, I think that might have been the case though, Stephen, where we were trying to compete and hold on to our own, well, these are my toys and not yours, and I think that was causing, I think that's where we struggled, and we were kind of going round and round, but Clint's absolutely right. I think we have to, that mindset is changing. I think that we're proving that already with some of the conversations that are going on.
Yeah,
thanks very much.
And I would add, Stephen, this is Sanjeev, is as we go on this journey together across carriers and OEMs, one thing that I think has come up a number of times is differentiation matters in that customer experience. And you asked about the ownership of the customer, and that's where that ownership matters too. Is I want my branded experience to somehow be differentiated from your branded experience. And so what is that differentiation, and how do I build a product or a business model that can serve multiple clients or customer groups in a scalable way, but then allow my partners to maintain some level of differentiation, right? So it's an interesting journey that we're going to be on over the next few years.
Thanks. That was a great conversation there. Clint, there's a question from the audience that is looking for your answer, and that is, it's okay. You'll be fine. In this messy in-between world, what do we do? Just buy data off the OEMs? How would you like to answer that?
I'll tell you from what my perspective, and that's driven by kind of my experiences, piling different initiatives around telematics data. I would envision that telematics data is going to come from a variety of sources. There's not going to be one place to get it. A lot of carriers will have their own program. Allstate has DriveWise, Progressive has their own, most carriers will have their own. In addition to that, they're going to create partnerships with the different OEs, the OnStars of the world, etc. I think sometimes, we will acquire in a financial transaction, and other times, value comes in many different ways. It shows up in many different ways. It's just not, financials. So I could see equitable relationships where telematics data is shared in exchange for other things of value. And I would put in there that the delightful customer experience is something of value. And you may find partners that think enough about that are willing to collaborate and share data for the mutual benefit of the customer. So it's going to be, unfortunately, Stephen, it's going to be all over the board, right? Some will share it for all the righteous reasons. Others are simply going to monetize it. And, probably things in the middle where, companies are almost horse trading data or services back and forth.
Thanks, Clint. And before I turn to the others for their comments here, just to extend this question a little further, we're all familiar with telematics data exchanges that have come to market in the last 2 to 3 years. Are they one of the many sources that you are thinking about, that you've referenced as just another way to collect that information? Do they make sense? Are they important to the process?
I think they have a place, Stephen. I'll call them aggregators, but same thing as these consolidators. It makes it easy, right? It makes it easy if we'll use an OE as an example. An OE doesn't have to figure out how to integrate with 20 different insurers. They give it to the aggregator. The aggregator has to figure that out. The insurer, the same thing. I don't need to figure out how to integrate with 20 different OEs. That makes all the sense in the world. That said, IT architecture has changed quite a bit over the, even the past couple years. And as OEs design their programs, it becomes easier and easier. Years past, integration, there would be this huge sigh and then this effort, right? And that took months and cost a bunch of money. And with the proper architecture these days, it really just isn't that difficult. So again, you'll see a combination, but I do see the aggregators playing an important place.
Thanks so much. Sanjeev, on the question of the messy middle and data sources and managing data, what comments would you like to add?
Well, I think that's what's interesting to also observe over the next few years is when you think about data, what data? So traditionally, and from a UBI perspective, there's 4 or 5, 6 variables at the most that we care a lot about as insurance carriers. Going forward, how many individual data attributes will there be that we care about and that we're going to ingest into our actuarial engines or our AI and machine learning tools? So, today already we can think about correlations that have already been established in the industry with specific safety systems, and we'd like to know whether they're on the vehicle or not. VIN information typically, isn't sufficient. So what data sources might there be? Certainly the aggregators can play a role here. There might be other data sources. So when I think about data, it's evolving, right? So beyond the ADAS safety systems that are already available today, you look forward into the way electrical architectures are evolving on vehicles. More and more modules and sensor data are going to become available. And so I think that as that happens, the cleansing of that data and the offboarding of that vehicle data it has to be taken up by somebody, and that's expensive, and it's even more expensive to do in some unique way for every use case, right? So every carrier, or every OEM. So there is a role. It's an interesting conversation to have around standards and around how what data is valuable as the connected car space evolves.
Thank you very much. Pete, as we shift our focus to commercial on this question of data in the messy middle period, how do the answers change? How does the focus change?
Oh boy, I think that's well, Sanjeev and Clint are right. The sources of the data, they're going to come from all over. And when you get into commercial, you throw in then the trucking companies, you throw in, we haven't even talked about the ag sector where you've got data sources that could come from, the John Deeres of the world. So it's a messy question too. Talking about the messy middle, it's a messy question. I think the one piece of advice I would give each carrier, if you're trying to figure that out, I mean, you really have to think through what's important to you as an organization. Where do you want to be as an organization? And what data is important to you? Sanjeev talked about the data variables that we might care most about, and there definitely is a core group of variables that make the most sense. But when you start going and exploring deeper levels of that, contextual data, and what I mean by that is weather data, traffic data, road condition data. These are all possibilities now, and when you throw in what comes from the vehicles themselves, I think Clint, you might have referenced this. When you talk about seatbelt data, seatbelt usage, and lane departure warnings, are they on? Are they off? Are they being used? It can get overwhelming and a little intimidating. So I think as an organization, I know we had to do this at Nationwide, where we really had to think, what do we want to be? What do we want to do? And how do we create a very thoughtful strategic plan on how to get there? Because it's real easy to kind of look around and say, oh, this carrier is doing that, carrier do that. Maybe we should do that too. It might not be the right thing for the organization. I think I think you have to look at what's out there. Maybe have some consultative help if that's an option. But dealing with the data is a big deal. The opportunities are incredible. They are absolutely incredible. But I think you have to be thoughtful about how you approach it.
Thanks very much. I'm looking at a question here that is a fair question, but probably a difficult one to answer, which means it's perfect for the three of you. So this is the question. OEMs have to do this because they need new revenue, right? Fewer people are buying cars. Question, are carriers equally as motivated? I'm going to just offer my quick comment up front and then ask each of you to add anything you care to, which is, I frankly think that both industries are looking at survival over the next couple of decades. And, these are not just strategies to incrementally improve revenue. I think we're talking about actual survival. But I'd love to hear from the experts. Anybody like to start?
I can start. This is Sanjeev, and I have a bit of a unique perspective. Most of my career was actually in the auto industry. In the last several years in the connected car space before I came to insurance, and I would say, I agree with you, Stephen. I think that it's important. This topic and collaborating is important. Partnerships are going to be key. But certainly at Liberty, and one of the reasons I made the transition was I saw that there's a shared purpose. There's a shared purpose, and as I mentioned in my opening comments, and the opportunity is meaningful to create value for customers. Aside from the idea that we've reached peak auto and cars are getting safer and premiums are potentially declining. I don't know when that will happen, right? So that's all true. There are headwinds, but there are also a ton of opportunities for us to differentiate ourselves as carriers, as well as OEMs to differentiate themselves on whatever their unique brand selling proposition is. And so the way I think we look at it at Liberty is how do we, again, with the focus on the customer, create differentiated value through reduced total cost of ownership, of which obviously insurance is a huge component, but then leveraging these connected vehicle data and technologies and collaboration to do that. So it's actually a pretty exciting opportunity.
Thanks very much. Clint, motivators from your point of view for Allstate to collaborate and transform in with these new technologies?
Steve, again, from my perspective, I tend to agree with you that for a lot of the stakeholders, it is about survival. This isn't an if this will happen. It's really just a when it's going to happen. I guess I'd look at it and say, this is inevitable. If I don't want to collaborate and I don't want to partner, with something that I know is coming at me that I have to deal with. I mean, that just doesn't seem like it helps me, create a long-term thriving business. So I guess, the motivation from my perspective is to get out in front of it and to lean into the change and, try to be one of the partners that are helping kind of define things, right? And you can have this first mover influence. Those are all of the things that motivate me. I guess you could be a fast follower, or I guess some companies could just completely ignore it and say this is, it isn't going to proliferate in the car park. Our customer experience is just great. Don't bother me. I don't think I'm in that third camp, though.
Kind of sounds like the Kodak strategy when digital started to emerge. Pete, what about from our expert commercial perspective here and motivators for collaboration and transformation?
Well, I think if you take a look at the commercial auto industry specifically, it's struggling. So there's certainly a motivation to improve on that for sure, plain and simple. But I think relevance is a big thing. Survivability is definitely big, but relevance, in the space where, everything is getting commoditized, and, in the commercial space, it's a little different because that relies so much on relationships. And, where you're not necessarily just selling a commercial auto policy, you're selling in a whole package in many cases. And so how do you stay relevant, but at the same time understanding that those customers are dealing with, business, a commercial business customer has typically customers of their own. And so by default, they're facing a lot of challenges on their own. And how do we navigate that, or how do we help them navigate through that? And so I think relevance is a big thing that and I think that'll help with the survivability. But there's certainly a challenge. We've talked through most of this call about that customer and the changing needs of the customer. And in these small businesses, and large businesses are dealing with that too. And so insurance, one of the things, one interesting thing that I'll share quickly, we took a look at this customer survey of small business owners, and it was a survey just about, where do you see yourselves? What are the challenges you're having? And there was also a section on technologies, and hey, what about telematics? Would you use telematics? And of course, most of them would say sure, if it was cheap, if it was easy to use, that would be great. But you know what? I don't have time for a big system, or I don't have the money to pay for systems. So there was a question that was, well, what if your insurance carrier provided that to you? And right away, some red flags went up. You could see that there was some consternation about that. Two things. One, of course, there's always well, what are you going to do with that data? Are you going to cancel my policy? Are you going to raise my rates? But second, it was, well, why would I want to buy a solution like that? Or why do I get a solution like that from an insurance carrier? You guys are specialists in insurance, and that's all I want you to be. I don't really need you to be my connected fleet provider. And so it was real interesting feedback that we saw out of this research project. It doesn't mean we're going to say, oh, okay, I guess we just pack up and go home now. I think it just makes it more of a challenge for us to find ways to meet that customer where they are. And so I think when circling back to survivability and relevance, we just have to find ways and be more creative and more resourceful on how we do meet those customers where they are, and whether it's through these collaborations we've been talking about, or the use of technology. I think we just have to find ways to meet them there and to delight them. Sometimes it's often things that they would never expect. And so I think that just a few more layers of challenge for us, but again, it is an exciting opportunity, and I think we're in a good position to do that.
Thanks to all of you, because I think we're really drawing out, pardon me, some of the nuances and challenges underlying what seems on its face to be a relatively simple title for a webinar. So I appreciate the feedback. We have a practical kind of a question here, and I think everybody probably has some comment to offer. Are expensive hardware in car telematics dead? Carriers can concentrate on apps and wait it out until connected car and OEM carrier is fully operational. That's a question or a statement, either way. But are the dongles going the way of the dinosaur, or is there a role for them still? And even the same question on smartphones and their role in all of this. Anybody want to start?
This is Pete. I can jump in on that one. I think there's still a place for it. We've got a ways before I think the connected technology, connected vehicles are completely out there, and I think there's still things that need to be proven out on the credibility of the data and how that data is transferred back and forth and analyzed. So I think we still got quite a few years before the aftermarket telematics solutions are gone. However, that being said, long term, with autonomous vehicles, with connected vehicles, I think you should be asking those questions about, well, if we're going to invest in this type of technology, how long do we want to invest, and what is that life cycle of it? But I'd be very cautious, because if you decide to wait until the connected vehicle's out there, you might fall behind. And so I think there's a balance in there somewhere that an organization has to determine.
So there may also be a middle for communications then. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Stephen, I was just going to add that I agree with Pete. There's several large OEMs that are still 1 or 2 years away, if not further out, from having a majority connected fleet. And so there's also the large existing car park that's out there that's not connected, majority of vehicles. So I don't see physical devices completely going away. There's certainly the cost savings and the quality of data element that's enabled by a direct connection, whether that's through an aggregator or directly with an OEM or some other source. And there's different data attributes that you can collect from different sources. I would say a dongle is just another source, right? Mobile is another source. So I think that over time, hopefully what we're going to see is the most cost efficient and reliable, high quality solution to emerge that we'll all want to adopt. But I think it'll take a few years.
Thanks. Clint, did you have anything to add to the hardware
question?
Yeah,
just a couple minutes. I know we're running short on time. But yeah, I would probably answer Stephen with, the expensive devices versus not. It depends what you want to do with it. If you wanted to price off telematics data, my belief is you're going to be able to build or buy apps that provide you with enough data to do so efficiently. I, being the claim guy, like hard devices. I like vehicle manufacturer data more, and I say that because my mobile device can't tell me seat position. My mobile device can't tell me approximate weight of the passenger or whether the seat belt was engaged or not. So I guess I would kind of finish that with it. You really got to think about the strategy of what are you trying to do with the telematics data? What are you trying to accomplish? Because that will probably lead you in one direction or another in regard to the channel of collection.
Thanks very much, Clint. Yes, I do have my eye on the clock, and this happens every time. I never know where the hour goes, but I do want to thank each one of you so much for taking the time and for sharing your expertise on this subject. And for the audience, I thank you for showing your interest here, and hope that you can attend Auto Insurance USA next year in Chicago, where these individuals and colleagues from their companies will be presenting as part of that event. Again, look forward to the next time we have a chance to talk. Have a great day and a good weekend, everybody. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye.